And now, the Deeper Thinking Podcast, a space for ideas and reflections in our uncertain times.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking Podcast. What if the moment that woke you up wasn't a grand political speech or a philosophical epiphany, but a joke that landed too well? What if the start of ethical clarity came not from solemn reflection, but from a laugh you couldn't contain, at precisely the wrong time, in precisely the wrong room? In this episode, we explore absurdity not as nonsense, but as a kind of epistemic tremor, a jolt that unsettles what seemed settled, that shows how much of what we call sense is performance. From slapstick to silence, from farts to fascism, absurdity becomes a method of seeing, especially when clarity arrives not through logic, but through rupture. Absurdity doesn't offer arguments, it offers asymmetry. A sideways truth that resists explanation, but insists on being felt. That resistance is itself a kind of ethics. It refuses to reduce. We trace how the ridiculous unsettles authority, how laughter holds ethical force, and how awkwardness becomes a mode of moral recognition. This isn't about irreverence for its own sake. It's about what becomes visible when nothing fits, and why that's when truth might finally appear. With quiet references to Camus, Butler, and Arendt, this episode listens for the wisdom buried in disruption. What happens when the body refuses the script? When decorum fails to contain dissent? When mockery becomes a mirror, and that mirror doesn't flatter? This is not an essay that resolves. It dwells. It opens a space for thinking that begins where certainty breaks. It begins as a joke, the kind of moment designed to pass without consequence. A fart in a crowded room, a sound no one wants to claim, yet everyone registers. And then, laughter. Not just a release, but a rupture. An unexpected collapse of composure, of hierarchy, of whatever narrative had been carefully assembled. Because the absurd doesn't ask permission, it just arrives, rearranges the room, and leaves you holding the question, why did that land so hard? The laugh matters. It's not just about the sound, it's about what it interrupts. We think of power as serious, truth as solemn, justice as grave. But what if the most accurate response to certain conditions isn't a manifesto, but a snort? What if the body knows something before the intellect can catch up? A laugh like that isn't random, it's recognition. A flicker of clarity that escapes before the rational mind can sanitize it. This is the ethical potential of absurdity. Not because it offers guidance, but because it reveals a glitch in the performance. And in doing so, it offers a strange kind of solidarity. To laugh in that moment is to admit complicity. To say, I too feel the dissonance. I too see that something here doesn't make sense. It's an opening, small, irreverent, but real. Absurdity doesn't explain, it disorients. And in that disorientation, you become aware of how many of your beliefs depend on coherence, on the narrative holding, on everyone playing their part. But the absurd breaks that logic. It inserts nonsense into the space where sense was assumed. And in that moment, you're forced to see not just the joke, but the system around it that made it possible and precarious. So yes, it starts with a fart, but it doesn't stay there. Because what we're really noticing isn't the noise, it's what cracked open when we couldn't pretend it wasn't funny. And what we do with that crack, with that uncomfortable, unforgettable laugh, that's where the ethical begins. Not in the clarity of what we think, but in the truth of what caught us off guard. Absurdity doesn't need to be profound. That's the trick. It slides in under meaning, unsettles the frame, and disappears, leaving behind a discomfort that lingers longer than any argument. You don't need to understand why it worked. You only need to notice that it did. That something landed sideways and made you feel more awake, even if you couldn't name what changed. It's easy to dismiss that feeling, to categorize it as distraction, to tidy it into embarrassment. But something more important is happening. Absurdity is reordering what counts. Who's allowed to speak? What seriousness looks like? Whether coherence is a virtue or a cover. When you laugh at something you're not supposed to laugh at, it's not just the moment you're breaking, it's the rules underneath it, the ones you were following without knowing. That's why regimes fear comedians more than critics. It's why children's questions are often more dangerous than adults' theories. It's not because they're right, it's because they reframe the field. They tilt the world a few degrees, just enough to show the scaffolding behind the story. The absurd doesn't fight power on its own terms, it changes the terms altogether. But even then, absurdity isn't innocent. It can reinforce as much as it reveals. It can punch down, it can distract, it can be cruel. That's why how we respond matters. Whether we rush to explain it away, or whether we sit inside its awkwardness long enough to feel what it's telling us. That's where ethics comes in, not as rule following, but as attention, as staying with the moment that doesn't fit and asking what was just exposed. This is not a call to elevate nonsense. It's a call to notice where sense breaks down and what might become visible there. Because sometimes what throws us off rhythm isn't a detour, it's the beginning of a deeper rhythm, one that doesn't resolve but reveals. Absurdity asks something of us, not just to laugh, but to notice what the laughter is doing. Is it easing tension or revealing it? Is it masking discomfort or naming it without saying a word? In its most honest form, absurdity is an invitation to look again, not because the thing has changed, but because now maybe you can see it differently. The joke isn't a lesson, it's a fracture, a moment where understanding slips and something more human enters, confusion, contradiction, relief. Think of how tightly we hold on to sense, how hard we work to make things add up, to believe we live in a world where the rules are clear, where logic prevails, where meaning can be earned through effort. Absurdity doesn't destroy that world. It just shows its seams. It gestures toward the places we've taped over, the things we've agreed not to question. The laugh that shouldn't have happened is proof that we know, even if we haven't said it aloud. That's the ethical weight of absurdity. It doesn't resolve tension, it holds it. It doesn't argue, it exposes. And that exposure is rarely comfortable. But it's necessary, because when truth comes cloaked in absurdity, it can bypass the defenses we've built around seriousness. We let it in before we know what it is, and by the time we realise, we've already changed position. We're already seeing from a new angle. None of this works if we insist on being in control. Absurdity doesn't ask for control, it asks for presence, for honesty, for the willingness to let something matter even if it doesn't make sense yet. That's not a flaw, that's the beginning of ethical awareness, not because absurdity explains anything, but because it makes you feel the cost of pretending everything makes sense. And once you've felt that, it's hard to go back. The next time the laugh comes, you might not dismiss it, you might hear it differently. You might stay with it just long enough to recognise what else it's asking you to see. There's a kind of generosity in absurdity, not the kind that comforts, but the kind that disrupts with care. It offers nothing neatly, no takeaway, no arc of redemption, no tidy reversal. Instead, it gives you the chance to be confused in good company, to let go of the polished performance of knowing and sit for a while in the strange clarity that only nonsense can bring. Not because it's meaningless, but because it resists meaning too quickly. This is what makes absurdity politically alive. It reveals not just the content of power, but its choreography. Who stands where? Who is expected to speak? What counts as appropriate? The fart in the room, whether literal or symbolic, is never just about embarrassment. It's about the structure that declared it embarrassing in the first place. To laugh is to acknowledge that structure. To listen to the laugh is to start seeing how that structure holds. And still, this isn't a call for mockery. It's not about weaponizing humor. It's about recognizing what laughter knows before language catches up. How certain disruptions carry truth because they weren't planned. How being thrown off balance is sometimes the only way to notice you were holding tension to begin with. Absurdity doesn't shame. It doesn't teach. It reminds. But it's not neutral either. It can be wielded as distraction or denial. That's why it matters how we hold the moment after the laugh. Whether we flatten it into a joke or open it into a question. Whether we rush to explain or let the discomfort breathe. There's an ethics to that pause. A chance to choose attention over resolution. A chance to notice what the absurd made visible and to ask why it needed to come that way. If we treat absurdity as trivial, we miss its signal. But if we honour it, not as wisdom, but as interruption, we might find that what it interrupted was more fragile than we knew, and that the feeling it left behind is worth listening to, even if we don't know what it means yet, especially then. Not knowing is the point. Absurdity doesn't lead us to answers, it leads us to thresholds. Places where our frameworks fray, where logic hesitates, where the world's tidiness slips just enough to reveal the scaffolding underneath. And in that revelation, there's a choice. You can retreat into order, patch the break, restore the performance, or you can stay. Not to celebrate chaos, but to see what else becomes possible when certainty lets go. This is where absurdity brushes up against ethics, not as principle, but as presence. To witness the breakdown without rushing to fix it, to hold the moment gently without turning it into metaphor or lesson. That kind of attention is rare. It requires humility and trust, not in systems, but in the possibility that disorientation might be honest. That confusion, when met with care, can be a form of companionship. We don't often talk about ethics this way. We prefer clarity, rules, consequences. But maybe absurdity reveals a different path, one where ethics isn't about getting it right, but about staying close to what unsettles you, where laughter isn't relief, but recognition, where the moment you almost dismissed becomes the moment that won't let you go, because something in it rang true, even if you can't explain why. So the laugh matters, the pause matters, the sideways glance that follows, the silence that doesn't settle, the knowing that lives in not knowing, all of it matters. It doesn't solve anything, it doesn't claim to, but it changes the shape of the room. It reorients you, however slightly, and that reorientation, gentle, strange, persistent, is the beginning of another kind of knowing, one that doesn't ask for certainty, just for you to stay. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Today's episode was narrated by Holly, our digital narrator, who helps bring our ideas to life. For further reading, research, and ways to support the podcast, please visit the episode webpage. Thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help keep us visible so others can discover and enjoy our content.